All right. So I looked at this. We talked a little bit about it last week, and it's just going to be a quick kind of run through. So James Baxandall tone circuit, originally designed for hi-fi. It just has two control pots, a treble and bass. It was originally created because it gave more control, direct control over the tone, and to me, it's more intuitive. Once you figure it out, you won't forget it. Commercially, it was used probably most popularly in that orange. Actually, that's supposed to be a 120 Mark II. That kind of set the standard for orange amps back in the 60s. The Ampeg Portaflex series all use the same circuit, and then those Magnatones there. So here's the circuit. Originally, so the naming thing we talked about last week, originally it was designed by E.J. James. In 1949, he published it in Wireless World, and the article is called Simple Tone Control. Again, you can find it on the internet. Basically, he was trying to find a way to, without having, like in the Fender kind of setup where you turn one and it impacts the other stuff, so it's not true one-to-one, and then it was, I don't know, I wouldn't say it's necessarily rediscovered. It's more somebody decided they wanted to do something similar, and he went through all the tone control circuits that were known at the time, and PJ Baxandall essentially created a different version. That was so the James one is a passive Baxandall. The Baxandall version actually gets inserted in the negative feedback loop. So that's essentially the difference between the two. So the best way to look at these is through that the Duncan Tonestack calculator. The top link there is just to download the Windows version. It's pretty old, so depending on how well your computer is set up, it may not want to run it because it's so old and you download it from the internet. Otherwise, you can follow that second link there, and I'll send this out to Gerald so he can send it out to everybody. But the second link is a version that runs in the browser, and so that's the one I would recommend using. But the original version has a lot. It was just updated last month, so it has a lot more stacks than just that little picture I have up at the top that's kind of blurry now that I see it on this screen. And then Robinette, I don't know, he doesn't date his stuff, but he has a kind of description as well. And there's an example of the way he has his set up with 1 meg pots. The original design was with 500 ohm. So
500K.
let's see.
500K.
500K. Yep, 500K. Let's see. Yep, we're next. So here's running it through that. Then here is what it looks like. And the way the controls work is that they're set at straight up, so at 5. So think of it from 1 to 5. And this is the way it would look. It's very flat, as you'd expect from somebody who wanted a hi-fi kind of setup. By turning both of them down to 0, you see the drops on the ends. So uniquely, you can see this is how they would get a mid boost. Then with turning them both up to 10, you'd see the drop in the mids, because the mids essentially stay the same throughout the whole kind of thing. And then here's bass to 1, treble to 10, and then the opposite. So and then here's my links to kind of have some true differentiation in them. One of the things that people commonly complain about is, as you can see from these kind of things, right? These two, essentially your mids are staying the same. So it's somewhat nice to have the ability to boost the mids. So that's a common tweak to this, is that they add a boost kind of to the mids when they put these types of things in on kind of modern ones. It typically works best in lower gain amps as well. So that's what I got on this.
Do you know what is that control that Merlin puts in the middle?
What's that?
Do you know that control? He calls it a tilt control, and that middle resistor he changes to a pot. Do you know what that's supposed to do in the big scheme of things?
Yeah, I was wondering about that too.
It probably is to change the mids where they sit.
Okay, so you think making that 180 variable could modify that mid swing?
That's what I would assume, that it's adjusting that, because I did see a lot of people playing with that number, or that resistor there, to adjust where the mids are hitting. And Rob Net has that on his website too, depending on what kind of guitar you're using to be able to.
There's no calculator that you know of that lets you play with that, right?
No.
Yeah.
And all of them are, you can see them. They vary. They'll say it's a James tone, and then the other ones say it's a back Sandal, but nobody's using the back Sandal circuit, even though they call it that.
Yeah, so back Sandal is an active circuit. Like you said, it's a negative feedback. So it's adjusting the shape of the negative feedback that's getting fed back in, and that's adjusting the tone of the circuit.
So is the 180, if you do make it variable, is it a rheostat?
Yes.
Okay. Well, I guess
where does this sit in the circuit? Is it on the first stage? Where is it? Right after the first stage?
Wherever you want.
That merging resistor that goes. Oh, never mind. Sorry.
It'll have more effect if you put it right after the first stage, because anything that affects tone, the closer to the front it is of the input, the more effect it's going to have, because everything else gets amplified as it goes through
the
circuit. So also you have less signal there to work with, so it's a lot easier to shape a small signal than it would be to shape a big signal. Now, I've used this a similar circuit, and I made a mid-range control. But just looking at this, I can see a couple of ways you could make a mid-range control, 2 or 3 different ways, really, on this. Has anybody used this on anything they built?
I have.
Yeah?
I use it for everything now.
Oh, you use it for everything?
Yeah, I like it.
Is the loss the same, or is the loss different?
The loss is
there's way more lower. There's way more loss compared to the than the standard Fender Marshall box, right?
Did you say more loss or less loss?
I think there's more loss, isn't it? Isn't it like one of the highest loss tone stacks you can have?
No, it was the opposite. It has a slightly more loss than a single pot, but it has less
loss than the Fender.
Yep.
Okay. That's
I didn't know that. Okay.
Yeah, well, that was
by your Tonestack calculators, it was down 20 when everything is set in the middle. I think where you calculate the loss would, see, that's over 20 dB if it's flat. Now, if you turned it up, there'd be less loss, but that's a pretty good bit of loss for a flat.
Well, I can put here just a second while I'll actually do the calculations for the Fender and compare the two.
Yeah.
Hello?
Cool.
Are you there?
Yeah, that's awesome. I'm really interested to see that.
Yeah, we can hear you, Gerald. I think Gerald lost audio.
It might be the headset again. Didn't Gerald have that headset?
Yeah, he's been messing with that for a while.
Are you there?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah, I was losing my audio there for a minute. Let me see here.
Okay, can you see the screen still?
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is the active browser version. So let's leave it at flat, I guess, for Fender. So this is the Fender circuit. We can take
the Fender's going from -12 to -25, but the James Tonestack was flat at over -20. So
so we can take a snapshot, and then you can switch over to the James. Oh shoot, it didn't allow me to compare the two. You can compare it within. You can take a snapshot, make changes. So that's why I like this version. And then
the other one's the same way. The older one.
No, that's so cool, man.
It
It
does.
looks so cool.
It does.
It
Yeah. So I like this just to be able to move stuff around. Um, there are changes on this. You can
I was going to say,
control
if you wanted to
it.
see what difference that R4 would make in this, you can just change the value of it.
Yeah.
Yeah, put
So
it to 50K and see what happens.
Yeah, that'd be interesting.
50?
50, yeah.
Why is my, it's not allowing me, oh, edit.
Oh, is that 50 or is that 500? What is that?
I've,
Oh, it's got a decimal point. Okay.
I don't know how you can see that.
5,000. It's not making much difference.
No, it's not.
Wow.
I use a 1 meg there for that pot.
Let's try
For
something
our-
Yeah,
extreme.
just because Merlin recommended that as the full possible potential, just based on 1 meg being a standardized pot size, you know.
So late last night, I was reading through, what's the guy, the Tut book guy, Connor. In his original first book, he has a whole section on this, and I didn't finish reading it last night, but he's got a lot of information about different values that you can use in this circuit. But
hmm But it looks like to me that the Fender doesn't lose as much as the is this if you were to just talk about starting off from 5 or something like that.
Yeah, that's what I'd always thought, is that
It's got a
the
scoop.
overall loss is much
Fender's
more.
got a scoop in the mid, but the bass and the treble are higher.
It's interesting to play around with the slope resistor value and see
so
the
that's
change.
and that's probably so you can see that the zero never goes below the flat on the highs.
Did Fender change those values around much in that stack, depending on the amplifiers they use? Like, I've looked at a lot of them, but I never really just paid that much attention to what they were using for certain slope values and stuff.
Mostly it's 100K for the slope resistor on a Fender.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Marshall is either,
56.
56 or 30. There was another one that had 30 something, 33, yeah.
And this is cool too, that you can change the slope the slope of the pot, whether so.
Oh, from linear to logarithmic. Okay.
Yep. But there isn't, so to me it shows that there isn't a lot of variability. Oh, there's a bigger drop there when you change the middle. There isn't a lot of variability, whereas the other one, there's more dramatic change for turning it. So from a user's perspective on this circuit, it's much easier to feel or hear the difference when you're turning it.
Yeah, I like the James is my preferred tone stack, but I always consider it lossy. I make sure that there's plenty of gain to push it.
Do the E series. Click that E series up there and see how that compares. That one doesn't have much loss at all, does it?
No.
Well, it sure does make changes when you go down, though.
Boy, I'm telling you.
Yeah, it hits right here and it drops off.
It's like whoosh.
Well, this is what's kind of weird is why does it drop off on the highs there?
It does the same thing. Boy, that's one heck of a
Tone
Kind of weird.
can't
Now,
turn it up
put-
What
much.
amplifier do they?
Put
What amplifier do they use those in?
the E series, E series Bassman,
Oh, okay.
some of the Bandmaster, the 5E7 Bandmaster. Go back to the E series and take one of the tone stacks and turn it about halfway up, and then take the other one and turn it down and see what it does. Because I think it does something crazy if you have one about halfway. They're interactive. Yeah.
I don't know, that doesn't seem to work well. I mean, for to me, the James just seems to be more intuitive, as long as you can take care of, and that's probably why I saw that the boost is a common tweak that people add to it, is to add a boost in the middle. But it just seems these other ones, when you're sitting there twiddling with it and you're thinking, oh, this is the perfect feel, and then 10 minutes later you're like, this doesn't sound good at all. I don't know.
So what's the boost? You said some people add the boost. How do they add the boost?
Just a second, I wrote it down, but I didn't put it in the slides.
Oh, you have to hit this with a cathode follower too, right? Yeah, I would think.
Simply paralleling, so I don't think it's on this. I got to pull up the slide again. Putting a 560 picofarad cap with the 330 picofarad treble cap. It adds a bump to mid-range. Let's pull that presentation up.
Well, you can just change your treble cap value on there, and we'll see what it looks like.
So
C1 is the one you want to add something to. Is that right?
What was the mod again?
Paralleling a 560 picofarad cap over the 330 picofarad.
So it'd be 890 picofarads.
C3 is the one.
Yeah, change it to 890 and see what happens.
Yeah, it's the same thing. Yeah.
Oops, why is it not allowing me? There it goes.
Edit. Yeah.
Well, it's just a little boost. Little boost.
Well, it does boost it a little bit, though.
Yep.
And then do the other one. Yeah. Try going bigger. Do a 1500 picofarad on it and see what that does.
So the mid range is moving further down.
Well, your Q is getting wider. The peak is getting wider is what's happening.
Yeah. So
make C4 smaller.
C4.
You get about 1500, yeah.
No, hell,
that's even wider yet.
It bumped it up even more, huh?
C4.
100, 200, 300, 400. So it's in the 300, 400 range. That's where it's affecting it. Oh.
And here's it's default. So what were you saying about the R4? Did anybody find that?
Well, he changed it and it didn't do much. Make R4 1 meg and see what happens. Do something a little dramatic here so we can see what direction it's moving in.
Oh,
you gotta hit edit.
No, it moved. It just dropped it from about here to here. Oops. That zoomed in.
When you do that, you have to run the, I don't know why, but you have to run, the wiper is connected to the base, that merging resistor for R4. And it only, for whatever reason, it only works for me that way.
What'd you do? You put a resistor in series with R4?
No, I used a pot there, just the wiper and one leg of the pot, but it wouldn't work unless I put the coming from the base. It has to be on the wiper. and then just a wire comes off one of the legs and goes to that treble pot.
Well, but that's still
What value pot?
the pot's still acting like a rheostat, right?
Right.
I guess so, yeah. I did it the other way around, and it didn't work for whatever reason. But that was with a 1 meg.
1 meg, okay.
You know, I didn't get into analyzing it nearly as involved as this. It was just by ear. But I used the 1 meg pot before, and then I put in, or I was using a 500K, and it sounded good. And then you get more of whatever's happening there when you use a 1 meg.
Well, if you wired it the other way, you'd be grounding it out, right? And you don't want to do that. It has to be a rheostat.
No, if you're using a rheostat, the rheostat's just a variable resistance.
Right, that's what I'm saying. If you wired it the other way, it wouldn't work. You'd be going to ground, right?
No, it's not going to ground.
Yeah, there's no ground. Yeah, there's no ground anywhere in there.
I'm saying if you wired it with a traditional pot. Yeah.
You need to have an idiot resistor in there though, because you don't want those completely shorted together. You don't ever want R4 to go down to 0.
What would happen if you did that? Oh.
Well, do R4 at 0 and you'll see.
Yeah.
That's the beauty of these things. You can test it out before you nothing.
Yeah.
Yes, it didn't. So it doesn't really do that much if it goes all the way to 0, huh?
Yeah, it didn't do
no,
anything.
but they interact with each other differently. Look, see when he moves that,
right
it interacts differently. Then that's what you need to look at is the interaction, because that's what R4 is going to affect is the interaction.
So right here, normally the dip's right here. And that's what I think Robinette is making that point, that if you change this value, it will move the midpoint, for you.
Have you used this Tonestack yourself?
No, I was just looking at it. I was looking at some way to add Tonestack with that was more intuitive, because that's the complaint I hear from harp players is that the Tonestack either feels like it doesn't work, or because they're all working together, it's not a true representation. They wanted something more simple. Like if I turn up treble, it should turn up treble. And this is essentially that, and that's how I found this, or that's how I, was looking for something that was a true, I turn up bass, I get bass. I turn up treble, I get treble kind of thing.
What's that PA that all the harp players like? There's a PA that was built in the 50s that all the harp players are crazy about. What's the name of that?
Well, the Masco MA17 is the one that everybody wants, but it's only because of the visuals.
Does it use this James Tonestack?
No, it's just a strict to ground. This is what it looks like.
Do you know why they like it? What's the characteristic that they like about it? Is it
actually they don't? They just like the look of it because it's small. The ME18 is the circuit that if most players, if they're going to say, hey, can you modify this for harmonica, they take the ME18 and they modify the circuit in the MA17 to match it. So here's the ME18, and this is the circuit so this brown one is the one that's most common, but this one here is the one that's probably, it's identical in size to the MA17. So this one's actually, the brown one's is an earlier late 40s, early 50s, and this is an early to mid 50s version. And this is the way they first came. They were 2 cabs with 2 10-inch speakers, and then this head would be in the middle. Most businesses would buy them, and they would mount these on the wall as their PA, and then it came with a bullet mic. inside the case when you bought it, and then a replacement was $7. That's
It
why
was
they're
a
so
paging system for a warehouse.
yeah. And that's why they always
they have those speakers out in the warehouse, and then they'd have a microphone in the office, and when they needed somebody in the back, they'd say, "Hey, John, come to the front," and that's what they used them for.
yeah. And that the reason harp players always had those bullet mics is that's what they came with. It wasn't that they picked them.
Yeah, that's
Well,
right.
I mean, the PA is designed to amplify certain frequencies in the voice range, right? I think they're even designed for the male voice back in the day. And they're not, they have a very steep roll off on the bass end and a steep roll off on the treble end, but the mid range is real strong and it doesn't distort, right? Is that basically what a harp amp is?
Actually, they want it to distort. That's one of the things we look for is early distortion, and why most of these don't work well for guitar is that we want the early distortion, but you want it only slight, so that when you cup it, the compression that you put on the microphone is what causes it to compress or to get thick.
Okay.
So most of it, like we talked about this last spring, a lot of this is just lowering the voltage. Or Harold or Gerald pointed this out. Yeah. So, and they do. They're absolutely wonderful sounding. It's the stereotypical Chicago tone. The thing is that most players that come to you and say, "I want a good for harmonica," typically what they mean is they don't want it to feed back. Some people specifically want the Chicago tone, but others want something a little brighter, like the Butterfield kind of tone, which is something completely different. So anyway, and then here's a modern version. This is the orange valve tester. That's kind of a simplified kind of thing that we just looked at. That you can buy. They're about $100.
Yeah, and I think they don't do a whole lot either.
No, they don't. Yeah. No, these are for somebody who wants it. This is the one I have, the TV7, which is the highest end military grade one.
That's the best one, huh?
Well, if you want the military grade ones, this is the best one.
Yeah, they each have different advantages. It's not a 539C like, no. but it is rugged as all hell, and it does the job.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
You go ahead.
No, I was going to say the negative to these is that you have to convert everything because it's all in the military tube charts as opposed to the commercial stuff.